So, some of your readers have asked you to develop your book into an online course. Or perhaps as you work on your book, you wonder if a course would be a better way to present the material. You know online courses tend to sell at a higher price point than books and with higher margins. But you also know that they're a lot of work, and you may have heard that most courses get few or no sales. So what should you do? Well, I've been creating and teaching online courses for over a decade, and I currently support my family by teaching online courses along with this podcast. And when I got started back in 2013, this was a very new endeavor, a very new industry to teach online, and I had to learn a lot the hard way. And sometimes I feel like I learned almost everything the hard way. So how do you create an online course? We'll find out in this episode of Novel Marketing, the longest running book marketing podcast in the world. Don't forget to click follow in your podcast app or click subscribe on YouTube. And this episode is not a step-by-step guide on how to develop a course. Who knows? I may make a course on making courses at some point in the future. I want you to think of this episode as a time capsule with some of my hardest lessons learned that I wish I had known back when I started making courses in 2013. So these are like the core things that you don't want to learn the hard way. And the first piece of advice I would give my past self is that courses sell transformation. No one wants to buy a course, but they do want to buy a transformation. There is something they want to be able to do or become, and they need help to get to that transformative place. And so it's really important to understand this as a course creator. You're not selling hours and hours of staring at a screen, because there's always going to be something more interesting to stare at on that screen than you teaching something in a course. The only reason someone would go through that is because they want some kind of transformation in their life. So let me give you some examples from some of my courses. So Obscure No More is our big course, and it's all about moving from obscurity to notoriety. The course is for authors who feel like readers just don't know who they are. They have a small email list, and they feel like when they're talking, no one is listening. In other words, they're feeling obscure, and the course teaches them how to become the kind of author that readers have heard of. Another one of my courses is called the 5-Year Plan, and the transformation that this course provides is learning how to write like a bestseller. And then my third course, and this is a free course called Amazing Author Websites. The transformation is you learn how to become your own webmaster. So you're no longer dependent on somebody else to build and update your website. I have other courses and I can talk about the transformation, but this isn't really about me selling my courses. It's more about me illustrating what a transformation would look like, right? And when I talk about Obscure No More, I try not to talk about all of the things that you learn to become famous, right? Because that's selling the features rather than selling the benefits. What people are really buying is being known, being well known, and being liked by readers. So when you talk about your course, it's easy to get lost talking about the features. And the classic feature you don't want to talk about when selling your course is how long it is, especially if you think that longer is better. This is not true. People would prefer to get whatever transformation you're selling in 2 hours rather than 5 hours. And they would prefer 5 hours to 20 hours. So saying this course has over 20 hours of content doesn't have the impact that you think it will. So even if you have a long course with dozens or even hundreds of hours of material, that's not what you focus on. You focus on the transformative effect of completing the course and how someone's life will be better, easier, or somehow transformed for the good after taking your course. The next piece of advice I would give my past self is explaining that information wants to be free and education wants to be expensive. This is a fascinating paradox of things online, and it's really important to understand. So first, let's talk about information wanting to be free. It is really easy to share information. It's just a matter of copy and paste. And so if you're trying to sell information, you're in a tricky spot. In fact, if you're wanting to turn your book into a course, this is probably a problem that you've already identified, right? Because it's hard to charge a lot for a book. $50 is considered expensive for a book, even if the information in that book could totally transform your life. Why? Because information wants to be free. People expect information to be free. Most of the people who listen to this podcast listen for free. They know they could become patrons, but they don't. And this is not because they don't value the podcast, right? A lot of you listen every week, but this is because you expect information to be free. And it doesn't matter how much work and research I put into an episode, paying any amount of money seems like a lot. And this can be true for courses, but not necessarily. And this is part of the reason why I so appreciate those of you who listen and support the podcast, because you're the ones allowing me to do this. You're the ones who are doing what most people are unwilling to do. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So back to courses. One of the things you'll find if you have a popular or successful course is that your students will start to teach what you taught at conferences and maybe even in their own courses. I have people who've gone through my courses and are now teaching their own versions of the novel marketing method, either one-on-one or in small groups or at conferences. It's almost impossible to keep knowledge a secret because someone talks. Somebody always talks. And I don't try to fight this. I don't discourage people from sharing knowledge because I think that knowledge spreading makes the world a better place. And I know that some of you listening to this episode will go on to create courses that teach the same or similar topics to what I teach. So the bottom line, though, is that knowledge alone does not transform. This is why most accountants and most financial advisors are broke. The more your course is information, the cheaper people will expect it to be and the less transformative it will be. If you really want your course to change lives, it needs to be more than just information. It needs to be education. And what's interesting about education is that education wants to be expensive. College tuition outpaces inflation every single year. In years when inflation is 2%, college tuition might be as high as 7%. College tuition is the only thing that's inflating faster than medical expenses. So if you see a chart of prices, college tuition is typically at the very top of that chart, growing much faster than inflation. Most college students prefer to spend more money to go to a 4-year university to learn from graduate assistants and from professors who'd rather be researching than to spend less money to learn from professors who love teaching at a community college. Some of my best professors were at community college, but people believe that spending more money on education makes the education better. They believe that sending more money to public schools will make those schools better. Is this true? Does more cost mean better education? No, not necessarily. Every year we give more money to public schools, and every year the quality of the education goes down. Many parents would love to be able to put their children in the kind of school they were in a generation before, a kind of school with a much smaller budget. And so while education is inflating very rapidly and the cost of education is going through the roof, online courses, when well executed, can help fight against that educational price inflation. It can help make good, life-transformative education more affordable for more people. But this brings up an important question, and that is, what is the difference between education and information? And the short answer is interaction and accountability. So let's break those down, and I'll start with accountability. Most people need help with motivation, right? Cleaning the garage, quote, at your own pace, unquote, means always putting it off until tomorrow and forever having a cluttered garage. Most people grew up in a public school system that had high levels of accountability and discipline, right? From kindergarten through 12th grade, you had a teacher looking over your shoulder, testing you, quizzing you, evaluating you, and making sure you did the homework. You may have also had parents doing the exact same thing, maybe tutors and coaches doing the exact same thing. You had a lot of external accountability to make sure you did the work. And the one thing that few people learn in school is how to keep themselves accountable. And because they're surrounded by so much external accountability, which means that as adults, they still need a boss or a teacher to look over their shoulder to help them do the work. This isn't true for everyone, but it's true for a lot of people. And people are willing to pay for accountability because they know they need the accountability. But even if you somehow learn to be self-motivated, accountability is still helpful. It's always helpful, and it's part of what makes education so valuable. There's a reason why you had so much accountability baked into your public school education. The second thing that differentiates information from education is interaction. This is interaction with the instructor, things like encouragement, feedback, and most importantly, answering questions to get you unstuck. But it's also interaction with fellow students. Hearing the questions that other students ask is very helpful. When I was in business school, I learned a lot from the other students as well as from the instructors. Also, now that you're an adult and a professional, those friends that you're making in an educational environment is useful networking. Those friendships can be very helpful for you for the rest of your career. So that interaction adds a lot of value to the educational experience. The next piece of advice that I would give my past self when it comes to creating courses is I would want my past self to understand the difference between synchronous and asynchronous material, or we could say live versus pre-recorded. And I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of both. I don't see synchronous and asynchronous as being at war, but it is really important to understand when to use one and when to use the other. Let's start with synchronous and talk about the pros. So synchronous is live. It's when students are interacting with you. And in general, students love live interaction. It dramatically increases how much students will pay for a course. The more live elements that are there, a part of the course, the more people will want to pay for the course. And getting questions answered is a really valuable, and it's really important for getting unstuck. Sometimes a student will get stuck with something and they just can't move forward until they get that one question answered. For me, often it's helping authors realize that their genre is not special, they're not special, and the rules still apply to them. Yes, I know you write children's books or romance or whatever, but you still have to do all of the things. You don't get to somehow get a shortcut around the hard work just because your genre is special or different. In fact, in many cases, the weirder your genre or the weirder your situation, the more work you have to do, not less. Synchronous content also provides accountability, and it allows you as the teacher to adapt the material to the audience. This is obviously the easiest to do in a live situation in person, but you can also do it when teaching online. But synchronous is not all roses and butterflies. There are some cons to live training. And the first one is that scheduling becomes a reason for students to say no. Suddenly, your schedule and your student's schedule have to line up, and that can be tricky. And it gets even more tricky as you start to consider things like time zones. I've had students in probably a dozen or more time zones, from Japan to Australia to Turkey to Europe, all over the world, and Hawaii. And it becomes really complicated for people to not have to wake up at 4 a.m. I had an author in one of my mastermind groups who lived in Japan, and he had to wake up at 2 a.m. to come to the meetings. And that is like the worst time to wake up in the morning because you can't stay up that late and you can't wake up that early. And it was just really rough for him to come to the live events. Some more cons is that it can become exhausting for all of your training to be synchronous, and you often find yourself repeating yourself a lot. And another downside is that replays of live events are super dull. No one wants to rewatch a 2-hour Zoom call to remind themselves of that one thing they can't remember. So there's no good, concise encapsulation of the topic in synchronous content. When you're there live, you don't notice, but the information density is a little bit lower when it's synchronous than when it's asynchronous. So for synchronous content, I have a few tips before we talk about the asynchronous stuff. I would encourage you, when you're teaching something for the first time, when you're creating a new course for the first time through the material, to always be live. This allows you to get real-time feedback from your students. It allows you to make tweaks and improvements. And then when you do record that high-quality asynchronous recording of your training, whatever it is, you've already tested it on a live studio audience, so to speak. I now do this with every single training I do, or I try to, where I test it out on a live audience. Then at the end, during the Q&A, I'll ask them, how can I make improvements? What didn't make sense, or what do I need to talk more about? And the questions that they ask at the end are often really helpful for me knowing what to include. I would definitely include a live Q&A with your course. This is really, really valuable. Students have questions. They want to get answers to those questions. They want encouragement, and a live Q&A is a really good format for that. And you might also consider giving feedback on homework. All right, so a lot of this has to do with how much time you want to put into this course and how much you want to charge. So it can be all the way to one-on-one coaching that's very expensive, all the way to everything is pre-recorded and there's no interaction with the instructor at all. So there's a lot of freedom and how much synchronous and asynchronous content you have in the course. So let's talk about asynchronous content. This is pre-recorded or pre-written content. So your book is 100% asynchronous, right? You write it and you die, and people can continue to read your book hundreds of years from now, which is actually a great pro, is that your asynchronous work will outlive you. While the live work is here and gone, the asynchronous work can persist. It's also less work in the long run. Instead of having to repeat yourself every time, you can record yourself saying it once, and now you're done. You have a good recording of yourself explaining whatever it is, and now you can just redirect people to that recording. For people who go through my courses, they often hear me say the phrase, I have a podcast episode about that. In fact, I've had students buy me a mug with that phrase on it because I say it so much. So instead of repeating myself, I'll direct them to a podcast episode or an extra credit session specifically about that question. High quality pre-recorded videos can increase the value of the course. It makes brevity easier. When something's pre-written and pre-recorded, you can have a really tight encapsulation of the content, which makes review really easy, and it makes getting the initial brush of the content really easy. So I think that there should always be some asynchronous content in a course, just because that brevity and that clarity can be really valuable. But it's up to you, right? I try to always have a mix, but your mix may be different. And I have friends in this business who are all across the spectrum, from they never touch it and interact with students ever, to everything is bespoke and customized for that student, and then all the points in between. So let's talk about some of the cons of asynchronous content. If everything is pre-recorded, you risk falling into selling information rather than education. And I will say, of my friends in this business, the ones where everything is pre-recorded and there's no interaction with the instructor, their price points are much, much lower. They can't charge as much for their courses because it's information instead of education. Sometimes one question can hold someone back. It can get them stuck. They don't understand something, or they need help applying whatever it is you're teaching to their specific situation. And without the ability to get that question answered, they get stuck and they get frustrated. Another con is that it requires some technical sophistication to record and edit high quality video. So everyone knows how to go live on a Zoom call, but recording good video requires a little bit more sophistication. So a few tips on asynchronous content. I would recommend recording 2 to 15-minute videos. So try to keep your videos short. So if you have an hour's worth of training, let's say you do a 1-hour talk at conferences, I would slice that talk up into 4 to 8 individual sessions. This is easier to digest. It gives people who are going through your course a sense of progress. And this is key, it's easier to keep up to date, right? If something that you said in your talk is out of date and it's a 3-minute video, you can re-record that 3-minute video and now everything is up to date. But if your video is 30 minutes long and now you have to re-record 30 minutes, that's a lot more work. You're less likely to jump in and make that update, and your course is more likely to be out of date. I also encourage you to have a text companion. So if you have a video in your course, I would have a transcript of that video that's available for people who want to read it and also search through it. Sometimes finding that one word, that one thing can be really helpful. And I also encourage you to allow comments. Even if you don't have any live elements, there's no synchronous elements, comments can allow you to interact at least a little bit with your students asynchronously. So they leave a comment at 2 o'clock and you respond to their comment the next day. Another tool that's really helpful is to create a companion worksheet with lots of fill-in-the-blank content. So even though you're not interacting with them live, they can be interacting with the worksheet. And then also, once they've completed that worksheet, that's really valuable for helping them have that better transformational effect of whatever it is that you're teaching. And the bottom line is that I recommend doing both. You want to have a mix of synchronous and asynchronous, and what that mix will be depends on your topic and depends on your strengths and weaknesses. There's a lot of freedom here. But what I didn't understand when I first started this business was that at all. I didn't understand synchronous, asynchronous. I just thought it was about recording content, uploading it, and people downloading the content and getting it in their brains. I was selling information rather than education, and I wasn't seeing the kind of results when I first started with my students that I'm now seeing. My students are now going on to change the world, and that's really satisfying, but it's partly a result of the better mix of synchronous and asynchronous content. The next thing I would go back and explain to my past self is the difference between cohorts and evergreen when it comes to courses. This is another kind of big thing that I had to work through and I'm still working through for my courses. An evergreen course is a course that people can start whenever and they go through at their own pace. A cohort is a class that has a specific start time and a specific end time. So you can think of it like a semester. So which is better? Well, it depends. So let's go through the pros and cons of evergreen versus cohorts. And unlike synchronous and asynchronous, you can't really mix these. You really have to pick one or the other when it comes to a course. There are some ways to mix them. I guess the best way to mix them, if you wanted to mix them, is everyone goes through it live, but then there's recordings of everything afterwards. So that's kind of a mix. But let's go through the pros and cons of evergreen. And the biggest pro is that students can start whenever. And, at least in theory, you have steady passive income. Although I have not seen this to be the case for most course creators. The course business tends to have very lumpy income, where your income is very much based off of when you're doing promotions. But if you are advertising and you're able to bring in strangers to buy your course through advertising, you figure that out and you've got that engine up and running, a good evergreen course that you sell through ads that you can do profitably can work. And that is a pro if you get that working. A con of evergreen is that with a lack of accountability and deadlines, students are less likely to finish evergreen courses. And sales tend to slump without your active promotion. So it's often the case that you have to be actively promoting the course or actively spending money to promote the course. This is a business, and there's some very real costs to hosting courses. And the costs are a lot higher than writing books, especially in terms of ongoing costs. And so that's something to keep in mind. And when it comes to evergreen courses, procrastination is your enemy in two ways. It's your enemy in that people will say, oh, I'll sign up for this course tomorrow. And it's an enemy once they sign up for the course, oh, I'll go through this next lesson tomorrow. And tomorrow never comes. So that's, I think, the biggest con of an evergreen course. So how do you fight those issues? Well, you create a cohort. This is where everyone starts at the same time, they finish at the same time, and the students are all doing the work at the same time. And the term cohort comes from Rome. It's a military unit, a Roman military unit. I think about Rome every day, and now you're thinking about it today, at least. So the Romans and many other militaries found that you can march much faster if you march together. In fact, I don't know if it was the Romans who started beating drums and marching to the beat of a drum, but an army, when they're all marching in lockstep, can go faster with less fatigue. There's something about doing it together that's more effective and efficient than people just going at their own pace. Even if they're going at the same speed, marching in step with other people is very efficient, surprisingly so. And so one of the pros of a cohort model is that you have better student outcomes, partly because students are more likely to finish the course because they're keeping up with everyone else around them. And another pro is that you have real deadlines, because the deadlines aren't made up. You could try to add deadlines to an evergreen course, but they're kind of fake. Fake deadlines aren't very motivational, but real deadlines are. A real deadline will help motivate people to buy now, right? You got to buy before the cohort starts, right? I have people emailing me all the time wanting to do Book Launch Blueprint, and I'm like, I'm sorry, you missed it. The very last Book Launch Blueprint happened. We're not doing it again. The cohort has left, and it's too late. Now, that's extreme, because most cohorts, they do it on some frequency, right? Once a year, or once a quarter, or once a month. And a lot of it depends on the demand and how big the cohorts are. But regardless, the deadlines are real, and procrastination is less of an issue, both for sales, because the deadlines, and for the learning. So those are the pros. The cons, though, is that it's exhausting. It takes me months to recover from doing a book launch blueprint. Also, time conflicts, right? Every time I do a cohort, I get emails from folks who are traveling, and they're like, oh, I can't be there the first week, or I can't be there the last week. And they're trying to decide whether they want to sign up for it or not. The book launch blueprint many years conflicted with tax season. I had one CPA author who emailed me every year complaining that it conflicted with tax season and made it really hard for her to go through the cohort. And the reality is, no matter when you do it, it's going to be inconvenient for some people. And you're going to get those emails of people saying, oh, I'm going to be out of town, I'm traveling, or my daughter's getting married, or I'm getting married, or whatever. So that is a big con, is that keeping in sync with your audience is a challenge. Also, people don't like waiting for the next cohort. There's a little bit of friction there. People want to be able to buy right now when they go to your landing page, and it's irritating for folks to have to wait. That said, that irritation may be worth it if they get a better outcome in the long run. But I don't think there's good or bad here. I have both evergreen and cohort courses. I think evergreen works better for smaller courses. If it's the kind of course you can go through in a few hours, evergreen works really well, especially if it's the sort of thing somebody wants to just race right through and learn on their own. They don't need a lot of motivation. They don't need a lot of accountability, or they're already highly motivated. It's a topic that has them really motivated. Evergreen can work really well. But if it's a challenging thing where you are your own worst enemy, right? If it's a lose weight type course, I think a cohort would probably work a lot better, especially for bigger courses with more material and where motivation is really an issue. Doing cohort and using the cohort model will probably work better. My next piece of advice for my past self when it comes to courses is to start small. Learn to be faithful in the little things before going on to make the big things. This was a big mistake I made. My first course was a whole course of courses with hundreds of hours of recorded material. At least that was the vision initially. And it was exhausting. It was very expensive. I spent tens of thousands of dollars developing my very first courses. So now what I do before I make a course, before I record any videos, the very first thing I do is I create the landing page for that course. Sometimes before even creating an outline for the course, the very first thing I build is the landing page that sells the course. This is where I make the promises of transformation to the student. And then after I've built the landing page, then I design the course to deliver on those promises that I made. And if that thing I really want to teach, because it's my own little thing that I really enjoy talking about, but if it's not connected with one of those promises, or if it's not connected to the transformation, I don't put that in the course. It helps keep the course focused, and it also helps me realize if anyone actually wants to go through the course. Because a really common mistake that I see a lot of people make is they'll put dozens or hundreds of hours into outlining, recording, and editing a course, only to find out that no one wants to go through that course. This could be a very painful realization, or the course is just not quite a good fit for their audience, or that everyone's really only interested in some small element of the course and they wasted all of this time on parts of the course that no one is interested in. So the first thing you do is you create the landing page, and then what I do is I create a beta version of the course. So I'll sell the landing page, or I'll sell the course to folks, and I'm really clear about the fact that this is a cohort, right? And it starts at some date in the future. And if I don't get enough sales, what I would do is refund everyone who signed up, and I don't make the course. I don't record the sessions. I don't waste my time because the market wasn't ready, or I wasn't ready. There's some product market fit mismatch. And reducing the cost of failure is so key in business. If you want to be successful in business, you're going to make missteps. We all do it. And the cheaper those missteps can be, the more likely you are to survive, to learn from your mistakes and do better in the future. So you do this beta launch on your beta landing page. You haven't recorded any of the course yet, right? It's all experimental. And now let's say you do get enough people to sign up. Your readers who are begging you to turn your book into a course, they all clamor to sign up. I'd also offer a special discount for this initial beta journey through the material. And then the first time you teach the course, what I do is it's 100% live because I'm practicing all of these teachings on the audience. And so even if I record an asynchronous version later, the first time I do it, it'll always be live. It'll always be synchronous so that I can get that feedback. And this will allow me to make tweaks to the recorded elements, and it also allows me to make the final product so much more polished. It also allows me to get feedback from the students in terms of the order and priority of things, because it's not just about what you're doing, but also the order of those things. So starting small with a small course, with a small transformation, rather than doing the big magnum opus and then doing a beta cohort through that course. So valuable. I wish I'd have known that 10 years ago. If you were willing to do this, rather than jumping into recording lessons and outlining trainings, if you're willing to do a beta launch, you'll find that it will make life so much easier and maybe save you from going into courses if this is not for you. Teaching online courses isn't for everyone, and that's okay. You're an adult and it's a free country. Before we go, I do want to share my tech stack with you. So these are the technical tools that I personally use for my courses and that I recommend for you. So for the big course platform, I use Teachable. This isn't what I started with 10 years ago, but it is what I use now. And Teachable is really good, particularly in handling the back office side of things, the taxes and the affiliate commissions and the 1099s. There's a lot of technical, legal, and tax bits that if you're using Teachable, you never have to even learn because they handle all that for you. For small scale synchronous events, I recommend Zoom. I think Zoom is good up to about 10 people. Once you move over to 2 screens, Zoom falls down, and Zoom doesn't scale very well when it comes to webinars. So for large scale live events, I use and recommend Crowdcast. I have used Crowdcast for years. I really like Crowdcast, and where Crowdcast really shines is in those webinars with 500 or more people. Because when you have 500 plus people, you're going to have more questions than you can answer. Right? If you answered questions, you could answer questions for hours. So Crowdcast has this great feature where the attendees to your event can vote on the questions, which allows you to answer only the questions that are most interesting to your audience, which makes the whole event way more interesting. For email, I use and recommend Kit, which is formerly called ConvertKit. They're in the middle of a name change right now. I don't know why every online tool feels the need to change names every 10 years or so, but it's now called Kit. And what I like about ConvertKit is that it integrates really deeply with Teachable. So those two tools work hand in glove, which is really helpful. For recording the video and editing the video, I use and recommend Descript. And again, for a lot of these things, I have affiliate links, not all. But Descript is a really good video editing tool. In fact, it's what I'm recording in right now. So it's what I record my podcast episodes with. And it's what I'm using for the YouTube version. For the computer, I recommend a Mac laptop. I'll have a link to our laptop buyer's guide, but you want to use a Mac because if you're using a Mac, it will allow you to use your iPhone as your webcam. So I recommend an iPhone 14 or newer, which will unlock continuity camera, which is a really great feature on the Mac. Your phone is by far your best camera. The phones now, especially the newer iPhones, 14 and up, the cameras are so staggeringly good. They outperform even $1,000 cameras that you can buy. And so with that money that you're saving, not buying a fancy camera, I would buy a good microphone. So if you're using your phone as a webcam, I recommend the PodMic USB. This is the go-to really solid microphone. And I'll have a link to that in the show notes. Teaching online courses can be really rewarding, but it is a profession. And you need to respect it as a profession. It's not something you just tack on or assume that it's really easy or assume because you wrote a book on a topic, creating a course on that topic will be really easy. If you want to harvest, you must first plant. And if you sow sparingly, you will reap sparingly. But if you sow abundantly, you will reap abundantly. So the more work and time and effort you put into your courses, the more return you will get and the better results your students will get. If you want to learn more, if you sign up for Teachable as a paid Teachable user, you get access to their Teachable University or Teachable U. And their getting started courses are really good, teaching kind of the blocking and tackling of online courses. Our featured patron is Jenny Fratsky, who is writing adventure, thrillers, and romantic suspense. Jenny, thank you for being one of those patrons who does contribute to the podcast. I really appreciate you. My family appreciates you. We have number 4 is going to be here any day now, and I could not support my family if it wasn't for patrons like you supporting the podcast when you could listen for free. There's nothing keeping you from listening for free, so I really appreciate your support. You can find the blog version of this episode at authormedia.com/427. I'm Thomas Umstattd Jr. saying thank you for listening and live long and prosper.